September 18, 1944. Lorraine, eastern France. Dawn broke slowly over the low hills and hedgerows of Lorraine. A gray mist clung to the shallow valleys, muffling sound and shortening sight lines to a few dozen yards. For weeks, the weather had alternated between late summer heat and sudden autumn rain. Now on this morning, the air was heavy and damp, the ground churned into mud by thousands of tracked vehicles. Inside a forward command post near the German border, General Major Wen von Wiedersheim, a veteran of Russia and North Africa, studied a map laid flat across a wooden table. The situation before him appeared deceptively simple. To the west lay elements of General George S. Patton's Third Army, spread thin after weeks of rapid advance across France. To the east stood the remnants of the German frontier defenses. Between them lay an opportunity. Germany's situation in September 1944 was deteriorating rapidly. In the west, Allied armies had broken out of Normandy and raced across France faster than German planners believed possible. Paris had fallen. Supply lines were strained on both sides, but the imbalance favored the Allies. American fuel shortages slowed Patton's drive toward the Saar, yet German shortages were far more severe. Aircraft fuel, motor fuel, replacement parts, all were rationed or absent entirely. And yet, in this narrow sector of Lorraine, the German army had assembled something unusual. Unlike the shattered divisions retreating from Normandy, the brigade was newly formed. It had been created in early September under direct orders from Adolf Hitler, part of a desperate attempt to stabilize the front using mobile armored fire brigades. These units were meant to strike suddenly, disrupt American momentum, and buy time for the collapsing German defense. The brigade's equipment was formidable on paper. It was built around Panzerkampfwagen Panther tanks, machines that by 1944 represented the peak of German armored design. Each Panther weighed approximately 45 tons, carried a 7.5 centimeter KWK 42L70 gun, and mounted sloped frontal armor capable of defeating most Allied tank rounds at long range. Its optics were precise, its gun lethal at distances exceeding 2,000 meters. Against it, the Americans fielded a mixed force of M4 Sherman medium tanks and a small number of M18 Hellcat tank destroyers, vehicles that German officers regarded with near contempt. The Hellcat was lightly armored, open-topped, and vulnerable even to heavy machine gun fire. It was not designed to survive hits. It was designed to avoid them. At 0600 hours, the German attack began. The objective was to strike the exposed right flank of the U.S. 4th Armored Division, part of Patton's Third Army. The American division had advanced rapidly across northern France and now occupied a wide front in Lorraine. Its combat commands dispersed along roads and villages that had seen little fighting in centuries. German intelligence assessments, though incomplete, correctly identified American overextension. Fuel shortages had forced Patton to halt major offensive operations. Units were spread out, resting, refueling, and repairing vehicles. The Germans believed they had found a seam. The plan was straightforward. The 113th Panzer Brigade would advance under cover of early morning fog, penetrate American screening elements, and strike deep into the rear of the 4th Armored Division. The goal was not annihilation, but disruption. Destroy command posts, sever supply lines, and forced Patton to halt his advance. It was a plan rooted in traditional armored warfare. Concentration of force, shock, superior firepower, surprise. What the plan did not account for, what it could not account for, was the way the American Army now fought wars. The American forces in the sector were not unaware of danger. Colonel Bruce C. Clark, commanding Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division, had received reports of increased German activity east of the Moselle River. Reconnaissance patrols noted engine noise at night, movement in wooded areas, and the arrival of unfamiliar German units. Clark's command included elements of the 37th Tank Battalion, infantry units, artillery, and a small but crucial attachment, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcats. The Hellcat crews were young, often in their early 20s. Their vehicle offered little comfort and less protection. The armor was thin enough that crews joked about being able to hear enemy rounds pass through the hull. The turret was open to the sky, leaving men exposed to weather and shrapnel. But the Hellcat had one decisive advantage: speed. Powered by a Continental R975 radial aircraft engine, the M18 could reach speeds of 55 miles per hour on roads, faster than any armored vehicle on the battlefield. It could accelerate rapidly, reposition quickly, and disengage before an enemy could respond. American doctrine did not treat tank destroyers as tanks. They were not meant to trade blows. They were meant to ambush, fire, relocate, and survive by movement. On this morning in Lorraine, doctrine would meet reality. The fog thickened as the German column advanced. Visibility dropped to less than 50 yards in places. Panther commanders peered through periscopes, straining to identify landmarks that no longer existed in the haze. The Panthers' long-range guns, their greatest advantage, were rendered nearly useless. At approximately 0730 hours, German lead elements made first contact with American forward positions near the village of Arracourt. The initial exchange was brief and violent. The lead Panther erupted in flame, struck from the flank by a high-velocity round that punched through its side armor. Seconds later, another tank was hit, then another. German crews reported muzzle flashes appearing and disappearing in the fog, too fast to target. Radio traffic spiked with confusion. Enemy location uncertain. Multiple contacts. Flank attack. The German formation slowed, then bunched together, a fatal error in restricted terrain. They were not facing heavy American tanks. They were facing something far more dangerous. American tank destroyer platoons operated independently, linked by radio rather than visual contact. When forward observers reported German armor movement, Hellcat commanders reacted immediately. Engines roared as vehicles accelerated down narrow roads, slipping through hedgerows and farm lanes. Drivers pushed machines to their limits. Crews crouched low in their open turrets, exposed to the fog and the possibility of sudden contact. They did not wait for orders to fire. They waited to strike. As Panthers lumbered past, presenting their thinner side armor, Hellcats emerged from concealment, fired 2 to 3 rounds, then vanished, reversing its speed, turning sharply, relocating hundreds of yards away before German turrets could traverse. The engagement became chaotic. German tankers fired blindly into the mist. Commands overlapped. Units lost cohesion. What should have been a concentrated armored thrust dissolved into isolated fights, exactly the kind the Americans wanted. By mid-morning, the battle had taken on a pattern repeated across the fields and villages around Arracourt. German armor advanced in rigid formation, designed for visibility and coordination. American forces responded with flexibility, speed, and communication. The fog did not favor armor thickness or gun caliber. It favored reaction time, and above all, it favored coordination beyond the battlefield. As German commanders struggled to understand what they were facing, American artillery units, positioned miles away, were already calculating firing solutions. They were preparing something the German army did not possess and did not fully understand. A weapon built not from steel, but from mathematics. The battle around Arracourt had only begun. What followed would not be decided by tank versus tank, but by time, coordination, and an industrial system capable of replacing losses faster than the enemy could inflict them. September 19, 1944. Arracourt, Lorraine. By late morning, the fog that had protected the German advance began to thin. Sunlight filtered through in pale sheets, revealing the battlefield in fragments. Burning vehicles, churned earth, abandoned equipment. For the German commanders of the 113th Panzer Brigade, visibility should have brought relief. Instead, it brought realization. They were not winning. Reports reaching brigade headquarters were contradictory and alarming. Tank platoons were reporting losses without ever clearly seeing the enemy. Panthers were being hit from unexpected angles, often at close range, then losing contact entirely. The Americans were not holding a fixed line. They were everywhere and nowhere. General Major von Wiedersheim ordered his units to push forward aggressively. The assumption was simple. The Americans could not be as strong as they appeared. If pressure were applied, their screen would collapse. It was a decision rooted in traditional German armored thinking. It was also a mistake, because the Americans were no longer fighting a localized engagement. They were activating a system. Several miles to the rear, American artillery batteries had already received coordinates. Observers, some on the ground, others flying low in L-4 Piper Cub liaison aircraft, had identified German armor concentrations as the fog thinned. These aircraft were slow, fragile, and unarmed. German soldiers often mocked them as grasshoppers, but they served as the eyes of one of the most advanced artillery systems in the world. The 66th Armored Field Artillery Battalion, supporting Combat Command A, prepared to execute a fire mission using a doctrine unfamiliar to German forces. Unlike traditional artillery fire, where shells arrived in sequence, giving defenders time to react, time on target synchronized multiple batteries so that every shell arrived at the same instant. Fire direction centers calculated trajectories, distances, elevations, and shell flight times. Guns positioned miles apart were assigned different firing times, all designed to converge on a single moment. There would be no warning shots, no adjustment rounds, only impact. At approximately 11:30 hours, the calculations were complete. The order was given. German Panzer Grenadiers, infantry assigned to protect the tanks, were advancing cautiously, moving on foot or riding atop the Panthers. They were essential. Without infantry, tanks were vulnerable to close assault. They never heard the shells coming. In a single moment, the air above them erupted. Dozens of artillery rounds detonated simultaneously, many air bursting just meters above the ground. Shrapnel tore downward in dense patterns. The blast effects were devastating. Men were killed instantly. Others were wounded, disoriented, deafened. Units dissolved in seconds. The Panthers themselves were largely untouched by direct hits. Their armor was too thick, but that was beside the point. The infantry screen was gone. Radio antennas were shredded. External equipment destroyed. Commanders, buttoned up inside their tanks, lost situational awareness. A tank without infantry was not a fortress. It was blind. With their supporting infantry neutralized, the German tanks were exposed to exactly the threat they feared most. American bazooka teams, tank destroyers striking from the flanks, indirect fire isolating movement corridors. Hellcat units exploited the chaos immediately. Moving at full speed, they shifted positions constantly, attacking isolated Panthers, then disappearing before return fire could be organized. German radio traffic became frantic. Orders overlapped. Units reported fuel shortages, mechanical failures, loss of contact with neighboring elements. Some Panthers attempted to withdraw, only to find roads blocked by wrecks or cratered by artillery. Others simply stopped. Fuel had been the unspoken constraint from the beginning. The 113th Panzer Brigade had been allocated just enough fuel for a short, sharp operation. There were no reserves, no margin for delay. As the fighting dragged into the afternoon, Panthers idled their engines to conserve fuel. Others ran dry entirely. A Panther without fuel was a 45-ton bunker. Crews disabled guns, destroyed optics, and abandoned vehicles they could not move. Some tanks were scuttled by their own crews to prevent capture. American forces, by contrast, operated under a different logistical reality. Fuel shortages slowed operations. But when fuel arrived, vehicles returned to action within hours. The difference was not courage, it was capacity. German commanders attempted to regroup overnight. Orders were issued to renew the attack, reinforced by elements of the 111th Panzer Brigade. But the reinforcements arrived late and weak. Many vehicles never reached the battlefield, halted by lack of fuel or mechanical breakdowns en route. The German industrial system could no longer support sustained armored operations at the front. The Americans, meanwhile, reorganized calmly. Damaged Shermans were recovered. Crews were replaced, ammunition replenished. By morning, Combat Command A was ready. When fighting resumed, it followed the same pattern, only faster. American artillery struck immediately. Tank destroyers maneuvered aggressively. German armor, reduced in number and morale, could not regain initiative. By the end of the second day, the 113th Panzer Brigade had lost the majority of its Panthers, destroyed, abandoned, or immobilized. On September 22, 1944, orders were issued for German forces to disengage. The counterattack had failed. Of the 58 Panthers that entered the battle, fewer than 10 remained operational. The brigade had ceased to exist as an effective combat unit. American losses were modest by comparison. Approximately 25 tanks and tank destroyers, many of which were repaired or replaced within days. The engagement around Arracourt did not halt Patton's advance permanently, but it ended any serious German attempt to regain the initiative in Lorraine. More importantly, it revealed something fundamental about modern war. Arracourt was not a battle decided by superior armor or heavier guns. It was decided by speed, communication, logistics, and coordination. The German army fielded some of the most advanced tanks of the war, but lacked the fuel, infantry support, and industrial depth to sustain them. The American army fielded lighter, less protected vehicles, but backed them with radios, artillery, mathematics, recovery systems, and factories thousands of miles away. In the fog of Lorraine, the age of the armored knight ended. The age of the system had arrived.